The burning sun of Central Arabia cast its light over the fertile region of Al-Yamamah, a land unlike much of the Arabian Peninsula. While many tribes wandered across barren deserts, Al-Yamamah was blessed with wells, farms, and palm groves that supported a prosperous people. Among its powerful inhabitants stood the tribe of Banu Hanifa, respected for their wealth, strength, and influence across Arabia. At the center of that power was one man. His name was Thumamah ibn Uthal. He was not merely a tribal chief. He was one of the most respected leaders in Al-Yamamah, a man whose word carried the weight of law among his people. Warriors followed his commands without hesitation, merchants sought his protection, and neighboring tribes carefully considered every decision he made. In a time when tribal honor determined a man's worth, Thumamah possessed everything that defined greatness. He had influence, courage, and authority. Yet despite all his power, he regarded the growing Muslim community in Medina with deep suspicion. Across Arabia, news of Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, had spread rapidly. Some tribes embraced his message. Others remained uncertain. A few became determined enemies. Thumamah belonged to the last group. Like many tribal leaders, he believed the new religion threatened the traditional balance of Arabia. Every tribe had long lived according to its own customs, loyalties, and beliefs. But Islam called people to worship one God alone and to unite beyond tribal divisions. To men who had built their authority upon tribal identity, this was a revolutionary message. As Islam continued to spread, Thumamah's hostility toward the Muslims grew stronger. Historical reports describe him as openly opposing the Prophet and his followers. His reputation became known in Medina as one of the influential leaders who stood firmly against Islam. Years earlier, Arabia had been a land of endless tribal conflicts. Alliances shifted constantly, and revenge often lasted for generations. Every decision carried political consequences, and every leader had to protect the interests of his people. For Thumamah, opposing Muhammad was not merely a personal disagreement, it was a matter of leadership, or so he believed. Meanwhile, in Medina, the Muslim community continued to grow despite constant challenges. The Prophet Muhammad taught his companions patience, discipline, and trust in Allah. Although enemies surrounded the city from every direction, the Muslims were gradually earning the respect of tribes throughout Arabia. Some came to Medina seeking peace, others came to investigate the new faith, still others came with hostile intentions. One day, Thumamah himself set out on a journey. The exact purpose of his travel is reported differently in historical narrations, but what is certain is that during this journey, he entered an area where Muslim patrols were operating. The companions of the Prophet had been tasked with monitoring the roads around Medina. Such patrols were common, as hostile tribes sometimes planned attacks against the growing Muslim community. When the Muslim horsemen encountered Thumamah, they recognized neither his identity nor his status immediately. To them, he was simply a traveler from outside Medina. Following their instructions, they detained him and escorted him back to the city. Only after arriving did they realize they had captured one of the most powerful chiefs in all of Al-Yamamah. For many leaders of that era, such a capture would have ended in humiliation or even execution. But what happened next would astonish everyone. Instead of throwing him into a prison, the Prophet Muhammad ordered something completely unexpected. Thumamah was tied to one of the pillars inside the Prophet's mosque, not in a dark dungeon, not inside a fortress, not hidden away from the people. He remained in the very heart of Medina, where he could observe everything that happened inside the mosque. From where he sat, he watched Muslims gather peacefully for prayer several times each day. He listened as verses of the Quran echoed through the mosque. He observed the Prophet speaking gently with the poor, the wealthy, children, travelers, and strangers alike. No one mocked him, no one insulted him, no one struck him. The companions treated their prisoner with surprising dignity. For a man who expected revenge, the silence was unsettling. For a leader accustomed to violence between rival tribes, such mercy made little sense. Thumamah had prepared himself for torture. Instead, he found himself surrounded by discipline, compassion, and unwavering faith. He did not yet realize it, but the greatest battle of his life had already begun. It would not be fought with swords. It would be fought within his own heart. Morning arrived over Medina with the familiar sound of believers gathering inside the Prophet's mosque. The first rays of sunlight stretched across the courtyard as people came from every direction to perform the dawn prayer. Still tied to one of the mosque's pillars, Thumamah ibn Uthal watched in silence. He had spent the night expecting interrogation, punishment, or humiliation. None came. Instead, he witnessed something entirely unfamiliar. The people entering the mosque showed remarkable discipline. Rich and poor stood shoulder to shoulder without distinction. Tribal status, wealth, and ancestry seemed to disappear the moment they lined up for prayer. For a man raised in a society where honor was measured by bloodline and influence, this sight was astonishing. No one treated the Prophet Muhammad like a king. No guards surrounded him. No servants cleared his path. Yet everyone respected him more deeply than many rulers were respected by their own people. After the morning prayer, the Prophet approached his prisoner. His voice was calm. "What do you have to say, O Thumamah?" The tribal chief answered without fear. "If you kill me, you will kill a man whose blood is important. If you show kindness, you will show kindness to one who knows how to appreciate it. And if you seek wealth, ask whatever amount you wish." His response reflected the customs of Arabia. Among tribal leaders, these were the usual possibilities after capture: execution, ransom, or release in exchange for political advantage. The Prophet simply listened. He neither argued nor threatened him. Then he walked away, nothing more. Hours passed. Thumamah remained where he was, watching life inside the mosque continue as though he were almost invisible. Families entered to seek guidance. Travelers were welcomed. The poor received charity. Disputes were settled with justice rather than anger. Again and again, Thumamah observed a community unlike any he had known. Food was brought to him. He was not neglected. According to authentic reports, the Prophet instructed his companions to treat their prisoner well. Some narrations mention that milk from the Prophet's own camel was brought to Thumamah each day. This was not the treatment an enemy expected. In Arabia, prisoners often suffered hunger, humiliation, or abuse. Here, the opposite was happening. The first day ended. The second morning arrived. Once again, the Prophet approached him. "What do you have to say, O Thumamah?" The answer was exactly the same. "If you kill me, you kill a man whose blood carries importance. If you show kindness, you show kindness to one who is grateful. And if you seek wealth, ask whatever you wish." Again, the Prophet offered no argument. Again, he simply left. To many observers, the conversation seemed strangely repetitive. But something invisible was taking place. Every hour inside the mosque exposed Thumamah to the character of Islam more powerfully than any debate could have done. He saw companions who genuinely loved one another. He saw justice without favoritism. He saw worship performed with sincerity rather than pride. Most importantly, he watched the Prophet himself. Never once did Muhammad insult his prisoner. Never once did he remind him of his hostility. Never once did he seek revenge for past opposition. For years, Thumamah had heard stories about the Muslims from their enemies. Now, for the first time, he was seeing them with his own eyes. Rumors were beginning to lose their power. Reality was replacing them. By the third day, curiosity had quietly replaced much of his anger. The prophet approached him once more. The question did not change. "What do you have to say, O Thumamah?" The answer remained exactly as before. Then something happened that no one expected. The prophet turned to his companions and gave a brief instruction. "Release Thumamah." That was all. No ransom, no conditions, no treaty, no demand that he accept Islam. The ropes were untied. After 3 days as a prisoner, one of Arabia's most influential tribal leaders was suddenly free to walk away. The companions obeyed immediately. Thumamah stood in disbelief. He had prepared himself for every possible outcome except this one. Freedom had been placed in his hands by the very man he had considered an enemy. No sword had forced him to change. No threat had been made against him. The decision was entirely his. Without saying another word, Thumamah walked out of the Prophet's mosque and headed toward a nearby palm grove outside Medina. The companions watched him leave. No one followed him. No one tried to stop him. To many, it appeared that the powerful chief had simply chosen to return home. But only Allah knew what was happening inside his heart. The journey that had begun with chains was about to end with a freedom far greater than anyone could yet imagine. The people of Medina watched as Thumamah ibn Uthal disappeared beyond the outskirts of the city. He was free. No guards followed him. No soldiers shadowed his steps. The Prophet Muhammad had placed complete trust in a man who, only days earlier, had been counted among Islam's enemies. Thumamah walked in silence until he reached a nearby grove where water was available. There, away from the crowds, he stopped for a long moment. Everything he had witnessed over the past 3 days replayed in his mind. He remembered the prayers. He remembered the discipline of the Muslims. He remembered the kindness shown to strangers. Above all, he remembered the calm dignity of Muhammad. Nothing about the Prophet resembled the rulers or tribal chiefs Thumamah had known throughout Arabia. A king sought power. A conqueror demanded submission. But Muhammad had asked for neither. Instead of humiliating his prisoner, he had honored him. Instead of seeking revenge, he had shown mercy. Instead of forcing belief, he had offered freedom. For the first time in his life, Thumamah questioned everything he had believed about Islam. The stories he had heard from its enemies no longer matched the reality he had seen with his own eyes. Standing beside the water, he washed himself. According to authentic narrations, he performed a complete ritual bath before returning to Medina. It was not an act forced upon him. It was a decision born from conviction. Moments later, the powerful chief who had walked away as a free man turned around and began walking back toward the Prophet's mosque. The companions noticed him returning. Some may have wondered why he had come back. Others simply watched in silence. When Thumamah entered the mosque once again, he was no longer the same man who had been tied to its pillar. He walked directly toward the Prophet. Then, before everyone present, he declared the testimony of faith. "I bear witness that there is no God except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." A wave of joy spread among the companions. One of the greatest opponents of Islam had willingly embraced the very faith he once resisted. No sword had compelled him. No wealth had persuaded him. No political agreement had secured his loyalty. His heart had been won through truth and mercy. Then Thumamah spoke words that would be remembered throughout Islamic history. "O Muhammad, by Allah, there was no face on the earth more hateful to me than your face. But now your face has become the most beloved face to me. By Allah, there was no religion more hateful to me than your religion. But now your religion has become the most beloved religion to me. By Allah, there was no city more hateful to me than your city. But now your city has become the most beloved city to me." These were not the words of a man seeking political advantage. They were the sincere confession of someone whose heart had completely changed. The companions understood the significance of what they had witnessed. Only days earlier, Thumamah had stood proudly among the enemies of Islam. Now he stood beside the believers as their brother. After accepting Islam, Thumamah explained that he had been intending to perform Umrah before his capture. Unsure of what to do next, he asked the Prophet for guidance. The Prophet smiled and encouraged him to continue his journey to Makkah, but this time he would go not as an idol worshipper. He would enter as a Muslim. For generations, the tribes of Arabia had traveled to Makkah while continuing the practices of paganism. Now, one of Arabia's most influential chiefs would openly proclaim the worship of Allah alone in the very heart of the Quraysh. Neither Thumamah nor the people of Makkah realized that another historic confrontation was about to unfold. The chains that had once bound his body had disappeared, yet something even greater had happened. The chains around his heart had been broken forever. After embracing Islam, Thumamah ibn Uthal prepared to continue the journey he had originally intended before his capture. With the Prophet Muhammad's blessing, he set out for Makkah to perform Umrah. The road from Madinah to Makkah crossed long stretches of desert, where caravans carried goods, travelers, and news between the two greatest cities of Western Arabia. But this journey would carry something far more powerful than merchandise. It would carry a transformed heart. As Thumamah approached Makkah, he knew he was entering the stronghold of Quraysh, the very people who had fought the Muslims for years and remained determined to stop the spread of Islam. Most visitors entered the sacred city quietly. Thumamah did not. According to authentic historical reports, when he began the rites of pilgrimage, he openly proclaimed the talbiyah, declaring his devotion to Allah alone. Labbaika, Allahumma labbaik. The words echoed through the sanctuary. For many of the Quraysh, the sound was shocking. They were accustomed to hearing the pagan formula that included invocations to their idols. Instead, this respected tribal chief from Al-Yamamah proclaimed pure monotheism in the heart of Makkah. People stopped what they were doing. Faces turned toward him. Whispers spread rapidly through the crowd. Is that Thumamah ibn Uthal? It cannot be. Has he abandoned the religion of his forefathers? Within moments, several men from Quraysh surrounded him. Their expressions reflected disbelief more than anger. They knew Thumamah well. He was no ordinary traveler. He was one of the most influential leaders in Central Arabia. "What has happened to you, Thumamah?" they demanded. Without hesitation, he answered, "I have accepted Islam with Muhammad, the messenger of Allah." His words stunned them. The man they once expected to oppose Muhammad had become one of his followers. Some members of Quraysh became so enraged that they considered killing him on the spot. But others quickly intervened. They understood the consequences. Thumamah was not merely an individual. He was the chief of Banu Hanifa, whose territory produced large quantities of grain and agricultural supplies. Much of Makkah depended upon trade routes that passed through or were influenced by Al-Yamamah. To kill Thumamah would risk provoking an entire region. Reluctantly, they allowed him to leave, but Thumamah was not finished. Before departing Makkah, he made a declaration that would soon place enormous pressure on Quraysh. He announced that no grain from Al-Yamamah would reach Makkah without the permission of the Messenger of Allah. This was no empty threat. Al-Yamamah was among the most productive agricultural regions in Arabia. Its harvests supplied food to many surrounding areas, including Makkah. When Thumamah returned home, he honored his pledge. The flow of grain toward Quraysh stopped. Weeks passed, then months. The effects became impossible to ignore. Markets grew quieter. Food became increasingly scarce. Prices rose. The leaders of Quraysh realized that one decision made by a single man had placed them under tremendous economic pressure. Ironically, the same tribal chief they had once counted among their allies was now defending the Muslim community. Yet even in this moment, another remarkable lesson would emerge. The Prophet Muhammad never sought unnecessary suffering for his enemies. When Quraysh later appealed to him regarding the hardship caused by the blockade, authentic narrations report that the Prophet instructed Thumamah to allow the food supplies to resume. Once again, mercy prevailed over revenge. For Thumamah, this was another powerful reminder of the character of the man he now followed. Islam was not built upon hatred. Its strength did not lie in cruelty. Its victory did not depend upon vengeance. The Prophet consistently chose justice and compassion whenever possible. The transformation of Thumamah was now complete. Only a short time earlier, he had stood among those determined to oppose Islam. Now he was willing to sacrifice his political alliances, economic influence, and even his personal safety for the faith he had once rejected. Across Arabia, people began speaking of the astonishing change. How could one of Islam's fiercest opponents become one of its most loyal supporters? The answer was simple. He had witnessed the character of the Prophet before he ever accepted the message, and that character had changed his heart forever. But Thumamah's story was not yet over. After the Prophet's passing, Arabia would face one of the greatest crises in its history. Many tribes abandoned Islam. False prophets appeared. The unity of the Muslim community seemed ready to collapse. When that day came, Thumamah ibn Uthal would once again be forced to choose where his loyalty truly belonged. Years passed after Thumamah ibn Uthal embraced Islam. The man who had once opposed the Prophet Muhammad had become a respected Muslim leader in Al-Yamamah. His people witnessed not only his words but also the transformation of his character. The chief who had once measured honor by tribal power now measured it by obedience to Allah. He remained steadfast alongside the Muslim community throughout the remaining years of the Prophet's life. Then came the day that shook Arabia. The Prophet Muhammad passed away. The news spread across the peninsula like a storm. For many Muslims, it was almost impossible to believe. Some companions were overwhelmed with grief, while others struggled to imagine a world without the messenger of Allah. But the greatest challenge was only beginning. Across Arabia, several tribes broke their allegiance to the Muslim state. Some refused to pay zakat, while others followed individuals who falsely claimed prophethood. Among the most dangerous of these claimants was Musaylimah, a man from Banu Hanifa, the very tribe to which Thumamah belonged. Long before the Prophet's death, Musaylimah had attempted to present himself as a prophet. He even sent messages demanding that Muhammad share prophethood with him. The Prophet firmly rejected his claim. After the Prophet's passing, Musaylimah saw an opportunity. He gathered supporters, promised power and privilege, and persuaded many people that he was Allah's messenger. His movement spread rapidly throughout Al-Yamamah. For Thumamah, this became the greatest test of his life. He now faced a painful choice. On one side stood his own tribe, his relatives, and many lifelong companions. On the other stood the truth he had accepted inside the Prophet's mosque years earlier. Remaining loyal to Islam meant standing against many of his own people. For a tribal chief in 7th century Arabia, this was an extraordinary sacrifice. Yet Thumamah did not hesitate. He openly rejected Musaylimah's false claims and declared that there could never be another prophet after Muhammad. His loyalty was not to tribal pride. His loyalty was to Allah and His messenger. Historical reports mention that Thumamah worked to oppose Musaylimah and encouraged those who still believed in Islam to remain firm. He understood that this was no longer merely a political dispute. It was a struggle to preserve the religion itself. Meanwhile, in Medina, the first caliph, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, faced the same crisis across Arabia. Many advised him to compromise, Some believed the Muslim state was too weak to confront so many rebellions at once. But Abu Bakr refused. He declared that he would fight those who abandoned their obligations to Islam, even if the entire Arabian Peninsula opposed him. His determination inspired loyal Muslims everywhere. Among them was Thumamah ibn Uthal. As preparations began for the campaigns later known as the Wars of Apostasy, faithful believers from many tribes united once again. They were no longer separated by lineage or region. They stood together because of faith. For Thumamah, this moment revealed just how much his life had changed. Years earlier, he had viewed Islam as a threat to tribal identity. Now he understood that Islam had united people in a way tribal alliances never could. His decision carried enormous personal cost. Many members of his own tribe followed Musaylimah. Some who had once respected him now opposed him, yet he remained steadfast. The mercy shown to him in Medina had planted a faith that no hardship could uproot. The prisoner tied to a pillar had become a defender of Islam. The enemy had become a loyal believer. And when the Muslim armies marched toward Al-Yamamah to confront one of the greatest false prophets in history, Thumamah knew that the final chapter of this struggle was approaching. The battle ahead would determine not only the future of his tribe, but the future of the young Muslim community itself. The crisis that followed the Prophet Muhammad's passing became one of the greatest tests the Muslim community had ever faced. Across Arabia, the wars of apostasy raged as loyal Muslims struggled to preserve the unity of the faith. Among the fiercest conflicts was the Battle of Al-Yamamah, where the forces of the first caliph, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, confronted Musaylimah and his followers. The battle was long and costly. Many of the Prophet's companions gave their lives, including numerous Muslims who had memorized the Quran. Their sacrifice later inspired the compilation of the Quran into a single written collection during Abu Bakr's caliphate, ensuring that Allah's revelation would be preserved for future generations. For Thumamah ibn Uthal, the conflict was deeply personal. Al-Yamamah was his homeland. Many of the people standing on the opposite side had once been his neighbors, allies, or even relatives. Yet his loyalty remained with the truth he had embraced years earlier in Medina. History remembers Thumamah not as a man who sought power, but as a leader who remained faithful when faith demanded the greatest sacrifice. His story became one of the clearest examples of how sincere guidance can completely transform a human heart. Remarkably, that transformation did not begin on a battlefield. It did not begin with a debate. It did not begin through fear. It began with mercy. When the Prophet Muhammad ordered that Thumamah be tied inside the Prophet's mosque instead of hidden away in a prison, he allowed him to witness Islam through daily life. Thumamah saw believers praying with humility. He saw justice practiced without favoritism. He saw compassion shown to the weak. He experienced kindness despite arriving as an enemy. Most importantly, he observed the character of the Prophet himself. 3 times the Prophet asked him the same simple question. 3 times he received the same answer. Then, without demanding ransom, loyalty, or conversion, the Prophet ordered his release. That single act changed history. Had the Prophet chosen revenge instead of mercy, Thumamah might have remained an enemy for the rest of his life. Instead, he became one of Islam's loyal supporters and played an important role during one of the most difficult periods in early Islamic history. His journey reminds us that hearts cannot be forced to believe. True faith grows through sincerity, wisdom, and noble character. The Quran repeatedly teaches that guidance belongs to Allah alone, while believers are commanded to convey the truth with patience and excellence. The life of Thumamah stands as a living example of that principle. The man who once hated the Prophet came to love him more than anyone else. The man who once opposed Islam devoted the rest of his life to defending it. The man who expected chains found true freedom. More than 14 centuries have passed since those extraordinary events unfolded in Medina. The pillars of the original Prophet's mosque have long been replaced through centuries of expansion. Kingdoms have risen and fallen, and generations have come and gone. Yet the lesson remains unchanged. Strength is not always found in victory. Sometimes the greatest strength is found in forgiveness. Sometimes the greatest conquest is not of a city, but of a heart. And few stories in Islamic history demonstrate that truth more beautifully than the story of Thumamah ibn Uthal. His name continues to remind believers that one sincere act of mercy, performed for the sake of Allah, can echo across history and change lives forever.